Welcome to our channel, where we talk all things true crime. This video is for educational purposes based on public knowledge. We do give our opinions at the end, but please do your own research. We mean no disrespect for any mispronunciation of names or places. Let's get started. Dr. Norman Glenwood Baker was born November 27, 1882 in Muscatine, Iowa. He was the 10th and last child of John and Frances Baker. He came from a wealthy family. His father had reportedly held 126 patents and operated Baker Manufacturing Company in Muscatine, and his mother had been a writer prior to marrying his father. Baker left high school after his sophomore year, and his early adult years were spent working as a machinist. It was after he saw a vaudeville magician act, he started his own traveling troupe that starred a mind reader called Madame Pearl Tangley. He also went by the name Charles Welch for a time. He ended up marrying one of his travelers, Teresa, who was a mind reader. After touring for 10 years, Baker would return to Muscatine in 1914. This is where he patented the air calliophone, a portable organ run by air pressure that could be heard a quarter of a mile. This would be very successful for him as it was basically a portable organ and in high demand for fairgrounds and circuses. However, his marriage would not be as successful and would end in divorce.
Baker wore many hats and never missed an opportunity to make money. He would start many different businesses and groups and would name himself as president for all of them. Other than creating the calliophone, through his life he would start many endeavors, including his traveling mind-reading show, a mail-order art school, a line of tires, 2 tabloid magazines, treating varicose veins, ventured into airwaves, and he even claimed to be able to cure cancer. We will touch on a few of his businesses, but not all of them. He even ran for Senate seat in Iowa unsuccessfully.
In late 1925, Baker got the Muscatine Chamber of Commerce to sponsor his radio station, KTNT, which stood for Know the Naked Truth. His radio show was heard all across the United States, broadcasting to up to 1 million people. At first, the show focused on rural and small town issues. He would have success with his radio station as well. He then began directing his commentary to denouncing the American Medical Association, stating that they were educated fools, along with making outrageous health claims. You can say that he was one of the first shock jocks on the radio.
Baker claimed to have the cure for cancer once he read about the alleged cure from Charles Ozias from Kansas City. Ozias had gotten the recipe for the cure from a South American witch doctor. With no medical training at all, Baker organized the Baker's Institute at Muscatine and opened his first hospital. It had 100 beds and was staffed primarily by chiropractors, osteopaths, and physicians from diploma mills. So with this alleged cancer cure in hand, Baker teamed up with convicted medical swindler Harry Hawksley, because who else would be a perfect partner? They began testing out this cure and offered it free of charge to 5 test patients. All 5 unfortunately had died from their cancer. However, this would not deter Baker. He began advertising the success of the treatment with the patients on air and in print, stating that all 5 had seen improvements.
Baker continued to make jabs at the AMA, stating that MD stood for more dough. Dough as in money. The Journal of American Medical Association published an editorial accusing Baker of quackery. Baker nicknamed the AMA as the Amateur Meat Cutters Association. The AMA would state that Baker had even claimed that the AMA offered him $1 million for his cancer cure with the intent of forcing it from the market so that patients would be compelled to resort to surgery. Upon reading this article, Baker attacked the author of the article for being Jewish. Baker was at times anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic. The AMA would lodge complaints to the Federal Radio Commission to shut down Baker for his unfounded medical claims. Iowa would also file an injunction against Baker and his associates for practicing medicine without a license. His hotel and radio station were both shut down in 1931. He would only serve 1 day in jail and pay a small fine for these crimes. This, however, would not stop Baker from achieving his goals. If anything, we can say he was a determined man. He would start another radio station in Mexico as he would be out of the reach of the U.S. Federal Communications Commission. also known as the FCC.
He went on to open another hospital as well. In 1937, Eureka Springs, Arkansas was down on its luck. What had been a flourishing tourist town was now not doing so well due to the Depression. Baker saw this as an opportunity and purchased the Crescent Spa and Resort. This was a Victorian landmark that was erected in 1886 and had faded dramatically. This place has been a haven for the elite. The Chamber of Commerce of Eureka Springs were ecstatic for the resort to be reopened and looked to Baker to rejuvenate the town. Baker would turn this stunning property into a hospital boasting of curing cancer and called it the Baker Cancer Clinic, where he claimed to be able to cure cancer in just 6 weeks without a knife, radium, or x-rays. Just his Formula 5 and positive thinking, he promised life. But could he fulfill this promise?
Baker began renovating the property and he painted nearly everything lavender, which is a shade of purple, as this was Baker's favorite color, even wearing lavender suits. He also mounted one of his calliophons on the roof, setting the tone for the institution. Baker launched an ad campaign claiming that the fresh air and crystal healing springs of Eureka Springs would make you healthy and cancer-free. Baker saw himself as a visionary healer. The literature he distributed stated that his hospital was where sick people go to get well. He would administer his cure via injection. Injections were given 4 times a day except on Sundays, because apparently illness needs a day off too.
So what was Baker's cure? It was a combination of corn silk, watermelon seeds, clove, water, and carbolic acid. Pretty common everyday ingredients. But what is carbolic acid? Carbolic acid is a sweet-smelling clear liquid and is used as an antiseptic. However, poisoning can occur when inhaled, ingested, or touched. Curious why this was added to Baker's concoction, the effects it had on those that were given it. This treatment was very expensive for thousands of patients flocking to the hospital from far and wide. Baker knew he could charge a premium price as these people were desperate. Many of them would have seen this as a last resort. They would sink their life savings into the treatments trying to save their lives. People with various diseases would come to Dr. Baker hoping to be healed. Since he could quote unquote cure cancer, surely he could cure them too.
To look legitimate, Baker had shelves of jars with specimens in them on display to showcase his success in curing cancer. He was a showman first and foremost and could easily convince people to sign up for his 6-week program. Patients would be declared cured even though they were in worse shape. They would be checked out and returned home only to die, some within days or even on the train ride home. Rumors would start that Baker was conducting human experiments on patients in the basement morgue.
The Baker's Cancer Clinic had revived the Eureka Springs area, but there was no proof that his elixir ever cured or even helped anyone. The total deaths cannot be confirmed. Online reports varies in numbers from 44 up to hundreds of deaths that would have occurred before the clinic would finally be shut down. Arkansas was either unable or unwilling to shut down the hospital, so the federal government had to step in. Baker would never be charged for his crimes against humanity, but rather would be charged with 7 counts of mail fraud in 1940 for circulating pamphlets claiming to cure cancer throughout the United States. During the federal case against Baker, at least 100 people testified that their loved ones died shortly after leaving the Crescent. One could speculate that Baker did not like the optics of dying patients in a place that guaranteed successful treatment, so he routinely sent home patients nearing death, so therefore the actual number of deaths could be a lot higher than what was recorded. Norman Baker would be sentenced to 4 years in order to pay $4,000 in restitution, which is only a little over the equivalent of $83,000 today in 2023. Baker spent 1941 to 1944 in the United States Penitentiary at Leavenworth, Kansas.
Being the guy that he is, Baker had the nerve to try to revive the Muscatine Clinic after serving his sentence. Luckily, this would be a failure. So what would come of quote-unquote Dr. Norman Baker? Turns out he had been embezzling money for quite some time. His annual revenue from his last hospital was said to be $500,000 annually, which is like almost $11 million in 2023. Baker had managed to embezzle an estimated $1 million, which he had stored up in Mexico. This would allow him to retire to Miami, Florida. He lived out his life in a 3-story yacht until his death in 1958 from cirrhosis of the liver.
So you would think that would be the end of Baker's wicked story. But wait, there's more. Up until the point of 2019, Baker's misdeeds would be attributed to some of the hauntings at the Crescent Hotel, Eureka Springs, which is still operating today. The Crescent regularly hosts guided ghost tours of the premises and is considered one of the most haunted hotels in America. Investigation shows like Ghost Adventures have even investigated at the hotel. There There have been some other deaths at the location, starting with the building of the property. The tour shares all of the history and tells the tales of the spirits that checked in and never checked out. You are even taken down to the basement and the morgue where Baker would spend a lot of time. Some may think that a lot of these stories are folklore and that have been exaggerated over time. But in February of 2019, while the Crescent Hotel's landscaping artist was working, old bottles would be unearthed. These bottles contained what appeared to be tissue. At this point, the area was taped off like a crime scene, and law enforcement worked with archaeologists to launch an excavation of the site.
The spot on the property ended up being a bottle dump. The samples were sent to the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences and the State Crime Laboratory for analysis. Arkansas Online reported that the samples were still floating in liquid. 100 other bottles from which the liquid had escaped through decaying lids may also contain tissue samples, still pickled and preserved. According to Eureka Springs lore, in the hospital morgue, Baker had rows of jars full of samples of tumors that had been removed from patients, which can I say is interesting in itself because there was a promise of no knives being used to remove the cancer. So it's a little confusing.
A full-page advertisement in the hospital's magazine included pictures of the jars. These bottles perfectly matched with the posters and photographs of Baker's bottles at that time, said Mike Evans, station assistant archaeologist with the Arkansas Archaeology Survey in Fayetteville, who's been working at the site. There were so many bottles that many were ultimately left in the ground.
After 3 long years, no progress had been made with identifying the contents of the bottles and jars. So Larry Flaxman, the resident paranormal investigator, asked for a jar with the unknown specimens in it to try to get it identified. Flaxman spent 6 months trying to find someone who would perform testing on the jar contents, only to be turned down every time. Finally, Dr. Quick, a surgical pathologist at the University of Arkansas Medical Center who specializes in tissue analysis, volunteered his assistance. What was found in the jar was discovered to actually be human tissue. However, it was not cancerous. It was identified as tissue from wounds. Like patients that were there bedridden would get bed sores, and while the sores were being treated, some of the tissue would be removed. There were also cotton fibers that were found, like what you would see with gauze. So at least we now know what Baker had been storing in the jars.
This brings us to the end of today's story. While Norman G. Baker was known as a charlatan, a con man, and a swindler, I wonder why he was never thought of as a serial killer. He continued administrating the same concoction for years, and he had to know that it wasn't working. From this documentation, it doesn't appear that he even tried to change the formula or the course of his treatment. Shouldn't he have been charged with wrongful deaths or medical negligence at the very least? What are your thoughts about Dr. Baker and the clinic he conducted? Let us know in the comments below.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and turn on notifications for future videos. Until next time, stay safe.